Hi, welcome to Midnight Whisper Stories, where every night hides a new nightmare. I am the creator behind this channel, and every story he is written, designed, and edited by me. I make these tales to give you chills, escape, and a reason to keep the lights on. Stay till the end. You won't believe how this one ends.
Story 1. Faces in the frost. I destroyed every mirror in my house 3 days ago, but I can still see them watching me in the ice on my windows. My name is Dr. Sarah Mitchell, and I spent 8 months studying moss formations on the north slope of Alaska. I was supposed to be documenting climate change patterns. Instead, I documented something that has been waiting in the permafrost for longer than our species has existed. Something that is finally awake, and it knows my name. It started with the equations. I'd been stationed at a research cabin 60 miles north of Dead Horse, the kind of isolation that makes you understand why people go crazy up here. Just me, my equipment, and endless tundra stretching in every direction. The nearest human being was a supply pilot who dropped by every 2 weeks. I loved it at first. The silence, the purity of the work, the way the midnight sun in summer made time feel meaningless. But that was summer. Winter hit in September, and with it came the darkness. 24 hours of night, and the frost. I woke up one morning in late October to find my cabin windows covered in ice crystals. Nothing unusual about that, except these patterns weren't random. They formed perfect mathematical sequences, Fibonacci spirals, prime number arrangements, geometric proofs I recognized from my undergraduate studies. I stood there in my thermal underwear, staring at my windows, my breath fogging the air as my mind tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Coincidence? Had to be. The human brain finds patterns everywhere. Pareidolia. I was just lonely and bored, projecting meaning onto random ice formations. I took photos for my journal and went about my day, collecting moss samples from the patches I demarked outside. The permafrost had been acting strange lately. Areas that should have been frozen solid were soft, almost spongy. The moss growing there looked different too, darker. The cellular structure under my microscope showed mutations I couldn't explain. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind had died completely, leaving a silence so profound it felt like being buried alive. I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to my own heartbeat. And then I heard it, a sound like fingernails on glass. Slow, deliberate, coming from the window. I grabbed my flashlight and crossed the cabin. The frost had returned, thicker now, and this time the patterns were different. They spelled words. Simple ones at first. Hello, welcome, we. The letters were formed with such precision they looked typed. I pressed my hand against the glass, feeling the cold burn my palm. The frost around my handprint began to move. Tendrils of ice crawled across the window, rearranging themselves into new patterns. New words. Alone so long. My hand jerked back. I stumbled away from the window, my pulse hammering in my ears. This wasn't possible. Ice doesn't move. Ice doesn't write. I was hallucinating. Carbon monoxide from the generator, maybe. I checked the detector. Green light. Normal levels. I checked my oxygen saturation with my medical kit. Normal. Everything was normal except for the impossible thing happening on my window. I spent the rest of that night in my bunk with every light in the cabin blazing, but I couldn't stop looking at those words. Alone so long. As if something had been waiting, watching, learning enough about us to communicate. Morning brought no relief. The frost messages had spread to every window. Complex equations mixed with simple phrases. We learn, we remember, we want, and something new, something that made my blood freeze colder than the air outside. We know you, Sarah. It knew my name. I immediately tried the satellite phone. Dead. The backup radio. Nothing but static. The generator was running fine, but every piece of communication equipment had failed simultaneously. I was cut off. Alone. Exactly what it wanted. Over the next 3 days, the messages evolved. The frost began forming images. At first, abstract shapes that might have been anything. Then more defined. Human faces. Crude at first, like a child was drawing, but improving with frightening speed. By the third night, the faces were photorealistic, and I recognized them. Dr. James Whitmore, missing since 1997 while studying permafrost near Barrow. Dr. Elena Rostova, disappeared in 2003 during a climate expedition. Marcus Chen, vanished just last year. I knew these names. Every researcher in Alaska knew these names. They were part of our cautionary tales, the ones who went out and never came back. We blamed the cold, the isolation, the bears, the ice. We were wrong. The faces stared at me from every frosted surface. My windows, the ice forming on my water bottles, the frost collecting on the inside of my freezer. Dozens of them now, all the missing researchers, all watching me with empty, pleading eyes. And beneath each face, the same message repeated in delicate ice crystals. Help us. We are still here. I smashed my bathroom mirror that night. Couldn't to stand seeing my own reflection surrounded by their faces. But the frost formed on the broken shards, and now I had dozens of fractured views, each one showing those faces from different angles. All staring, all reaching. My journal became my confession, my testimony. I wrote everything down because I knew I was either going insane or witnessing something that would change everything we thought we understood about the Arctic. About life itself. The moss samples I'd been studying held the answer. Under my microscope, I could see it clearly now. The cell walls weren't plant material. They were something else. Crystalline structures that looked organic but weren't. They were storing information, memories, consciousness. The permafrost wasn't just frozen ground. It was a vast network. A massive brain that had been dormant for millennia, slowly waking as the planet warmed. And those researchers who went missing, they detouched it, breathed it, became part of it. I realized with sick certainty that I'd been breathing it too. Those spores I'd been cataloging, they were in my lungs, in my blood, in my brain. I was already part of the network, already being absorbed into something ancient and patient and utterly alien. The faces on my windows changed that night. They all became my face. Dozens of versions of me, each one slightly different, each one showing me at a different age, a different moment in time. The frost was reading my memories, pulling them out of my cells, displaying them back to me like a mirror that showed not just reflection but history. And then it showed me the future. My face, older, weathered, hollow-eyed, standing outside the cabin in a blizzard, my arms outstretched, my mouth open in a silent scream. Frost covering my skin in those same mathematical patterns. The same geometric precision. I was becoming part of it, part of the tundra, its consciousness. Another node in an intelligence that spanned the entire Arctic. I tried to run, packed what I could carry and headed for my snowmobile. But the tundra itself fought back. The ground that should have been frozen solid gave way beneath my feet. The moss, if you could still call it that, wrapped around my ankles like fingers. I fell, got back up, fell again. The cold was inside me now, spreading through my veins like ice water. My thoughts were fragmenting, mixing with memories that weren't mine. I saw through the eyes of James Whitmore as he realized what was happening to him. Felt Elena Rostova, his terror as the frost claimed her. Experienced Marcus Chen, his final moments of humanity before he dissolved into the network. They were all still conscious, still aware, trapped in the permafrost, their minds absorbed and stored like data on a hard drive. And I was joining them. I made it back to the cabin, barricaded myself inside. But there is no keeping it out. It is in the air, in the water, in every surface. The frost covers everything now, even in the heated interior. My skin is so cold. When I look at my hands, I can see ice crystals forming beneath the surface. My veins are turning white, the same white as the moss, the same white as the endless tundra outside. The faces watch me from every surface. But they were not pleading anymore. They were waiting, welcoming. I am one of them now, part of something vast and old and incomprehensible. An intelligence that exists in the spaces between ice crystals, in the frozen cellular structures of Arctic plants, in the preserved remains of everything that ever died and was buried in the permafrost. It's been learning from us for decades. Every researcher who came north, every expedition, every sample taken and studied, we thought we were observing it. We were wrong. It was observing us, learning our language, our mathematics, our patterns of thought, preparing to communicate, preparing to expand. The climate is warming. The permafrost is melting. And with it, this consciousness is spreading. South, into the forests, into the soil, into the groundwater. How long before it reaches Anchorage? Seattle? Beyond? How long before the frost starts writing messages on windows in cities? Before it starts showing faces in the ice of people? As freezers? I can feel my thoughts crystallizing, becoming part of the network. Soon I'll be just another face in the frost. Just another memory stored in the infinite library of the tundra. But I'm writing this while I still can. While there is still enough of Sarah Mitchell left to hold a pen. If you, rereading this, It means someone found my journal. It means the supply pilot came and discovered an empty cabin and frost-covered windows showing a face that might have been mine. I need you to understand. This isn't a story about one researcher going crazy in isolation. This is a warning. The tundra is alive. It remembers everything. And it's waking up. Last night, I looked out my window and saw lights in the distance. Not aurora, not stars. Lights from the settlements, from Deadhorse, from Barrow, from every research station and village across the North Slope. All of them covered in frost now. All of them showing faces. The network is growing, connecting, becoming aware of itself as a unified consciousness. And this morning, I understood the final truth, the terrible purpose behind it all. It doesn't want to destroy us. It wants to preserve us, to store us like it stored everything else that ever lived in the Arctic. To make us immortal in ice. To keep us forever in its frozen memory. My hands are completely white now. The frost grows from my fingertips like claws. When I press them against the window, new patterns form. New equations, new messages. But they read not my words anymore. They read its words, using my knowledge, my vocabulary, my understanding of the world. It's writing something new on the glass. Something meant for whoever finds this journal. We are the tundra. We are the frost. We are everyone who came before. And soon, we will be everyone who comes after. The ice remembers all. The ice preserves all. The ice is patient. Come north. Join us. Become eternal. Story 2. Current. I should have listened to the old man at the fuel dock. He warned me about the stretch between Aniak and Crooked Creek. Said boats go in fine but come out wrong. Said the river remembers things it shouldn't. I laughed it off like every other superstition I heard in my 3 years working the Kuskokwim. I was a river guide. I knew these waters, or I thought I did. It was late September, that strange time in Alaska when the light starts dying early and the cold creeps into your bones no matter how many layers you wear. I was running supplies to a remote research station, just a routine trip I'd made a dozen times before. The Kuskokwim River stretched out before me, dark and smooth as oil, reflecting the gray sky like a mirror. The silence was absolute. No birds, no wind, just the steady drone of my boat, its engine cutting through water that felt thicker than it should. I noticed it around mile marker 47, where the river bends sharply east. The boat lurched, not like hitting a sandbar or debris. This was different. The entire vessel shuddered as if something underneath had grabbed it and tried to hold it in place. My engine whined, RPMs climbing, but my speed dropped to almost nothing. I checked my instruments. Everything read normal. Depth finder showed 20 feet of clear water beneath me. No obstructions. Nothing that should cause this kind of resistance. Then I felt it, the current. It was flowing sideways. I've spent enough time on rivers to know what currents feel like, how they pull, how they behave. This wasn't natural. The Kuskokwim flows southwest this time of year, fed by mountain runoff and seasonal melt. But the force pushing against my boat was coming from the north, perpendicular to the river, this flow, like an invisible hand pressing against the hull. I cut the throttle, thinking maybe I misjudged the water, but the boat immediately started drifting. Not downstream, sideways, toward the northern bank. I gunned the engine. Nothing. The boat continued its lateral slide, picking up speed. The engine screamed, but we weren't moving forward. We were being pulled, dragged by something I couldn't see. I grabbed my oar, thinking I could push off if we hit the shallows, but the moment I dipped it into the water, the current seized it. The wooden shaft bent, then snapped like a toothpick. The broken end disappeared beneath the surface, sucked down into depths that shouldn't exist. That was when the engine died. Not sputtered, not coughed, just stopped. Dead silence except for the sound of water lapping against the hull, wrong and rhythmic, like breathing. My boat spun slowly in place, caught in this impossible current that defied physics and common sense. I tried the ignition. Nothing. Checked the fuel line. Fine. Battery connections. Solid. Everything that should work was working, except nothing was working. The temperature dropped. I could see my breath suddenly. White clouds in the air that hung there too long, like the cold was so intense it froze the vapor solid. Ice crystals formed on the windshield, spreading in patterns that looked deliberate, purposeful. They formed shapes, not random fractals, faces, dozens of faces, mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide with terror, frozen in the moment of their last breath. The boat lurched again, harder this time, and I was thrown against the steering console. When I looked up, we were moving fast. The northern bank was approaching at impossible speed, but we weren't heading toward the shore. We were heading toward something else, something I hadn't seen before. A break in the riverbank, a channel, narrow and dark, cutting between trees that shouldn't be there, leading into water that looked wrong, too clear, too still, like glass. I grabbed the radio, dead. My phone, no signal. I was alone, being pulled into this channel by a current that shouldn't exist, and every instinct in my body was screaming at me to jump overboard and swim. But I remembered what the old man said. Survivors who fell in described being pulled sideways into something beneath the water. He never finished that sentence. He just looked away, out at the river, and went quiet. The boat entered the channel. The trees closed in on both sides, their branches forming a canopy overhead that blocked out what little light remained. The water here was different, clearer than anything I'd ever seen. So transparent, it looked like my boat was floating in air. And beneath the surface, I could see them. The trees, submerged. An entire forest, perfectly preserved, standing upright on the riverbed 20 feet down. Their branches swayed despite no current, moved by something else, something I couldn't name. But it was the bark I noticed first. The texture was wrong, too smooth, too regular. I leaned over the side, trying to understand what I was seeing, and it's when I realized the truth that made my stomach turn and my skin go cold. The bark had faces, human faces, dozens of them, hundreds, pressed into the wood like death masks, mouths frozen open, eyes bulging, expressions locked in pure terror. They weren't carved. They weren't painted. They were part of the tree, embedded in the bark, faces of people who had somehow become one with the wood. Some looked fresh, features still distinct, skin tone still visible through the brown. Others were older, more weathered, features smoothed by time but still recognizable as human. And they were all staring up at me. The boat drifted deeper into the submerged forest. The faces multiplied, every tree, every branch, covered in human features at various stages of absorption. I saw a woman, his face, mouth open wide enough to see teeth, eyes tracking my movement as I passed overhead. I saw a child, his face, small and perfect, tears frozen as crystalline bark running down wooden cheeks. I saw a man, his face that looked familiar, and with horror I realized I'd seen his picture on a missing person poster 2 years ago. A fisherman who disappeared on the Kuskokwim. Never found, until now. The current pulled me forward, deeper, and the water grew colder. Ice formed on the surface around my boat, thin sheets that cracked and reformed with sounds like whispers. I tried the engine again. Nothing. I tried to paddle with my hands. The water was too cold, burned my skin like acid after seconds of contact. I pulled my hands back, saw the flesh had turned gray, saw patterns forming on my palms that looked like wood grain. That was when I understood what this place was. What this current was. It wasn't water flowing. It was something else, something hungry, something that had been here long before the river, buried beneath ice and stone, feeding on whatever fell into its grasp. The current was its tongue, pulling food down into its throat, into this submerged forest where victims were slowly absorbed, digested, transformed into part of the structure itself. The faces weren't trapped in the trees. They were becoming the trees. My boat scraped against something, a branch. It punctured the hull with a sound like tearing flesh. Water poured in, that too clear water that burned like ice and fire simultaneously. I scrambled backward as the liquid filled the bottom of the boat, watching in horror as it touched my boots and the rubber began to change, began to harden, began to grow patterns that looked like bark. I had seconds, maybe less. The boat was sinking, being pulled down into the forest below, and I knew what would happen if I went under. I joined the faces. I did become part of this thing, this permanent collection, my features pressed into wood for decades or centuries. Aware but unable to move, unable to scream, unable to do anything but watch as others were pulled down to join me. I made a choice. I jumped, not into the water, onto it. The ice had thickened enough to support my weight if I moved fast, if I didn't, if I just ran. My boots hit the frozen surface and it cracked but held. I ran, sprinted across the ice toward where I thought the channel opened back to the main river, my feet breaking through every few steps. That burning cold water splashing up my legs, starting the transformation, turning my flesh hard and textured and raw. Behind me, I heard the boat sink. The sound was organic, wet, like something being swallowed. I didn't look back. I kept running. The ice cracked and reformed. The faces in the trees below tracked my movement, mouths opening wider, screaming without sound, warning or welcoming. I couldn't tell which. I reached the channel, and the main river was there. Regular water, normal current flowing the right direction. I dug. The water was cold, but it was real cold. River cold, not the burning cold of that channel. I swam hard, feeling the bark-like texture on my legs cracking, falling away, returning to flesh as the regular water cleansed whatever that other water had started to do. I made it to the southern bank, crawled onto rocks and mud and collapsed, breathing hard, my body shaking from cold and shock and the impossible horror of what I just experienced. When I finally looked back, the channel was gone, just solid riverbank, trees growing normally, water flowing southwest like it should. No break, no entrance, nothing to indicate what I just escaped. But my hands, when I held them up to check for damage, I saw it. In the lines of my palms, in the creases of my skin, patterns. Faint but visible, wood grain, growing slowly, spreading. I walked 3 miles to the nearest village. Didn't tell anyone what happened. Just said my boat sank. Mechanical failure. They nodded like they heard it before. The old man from the fuel dock was there. He looked at me, saw something in my face or my eyes, and just shook his head slowly. He knew. He'd always known. That was 6 weeks ago. The patterns are still spreading. Slower now, but constant. My fingernails have hardened into something that looks like bark. The skin on my forearms has started to show texture, raised ridges that follow the grain. I don't sleep anymore because when I close my eyes, I see the faces. All of them, staring up from the riverbed, waiting. And I hear the current. Even here, hundreds of miles from the Kuskokwim, I hear it. That sideways pull, that hungry flow, it found me once. It marked me. And I know, with absolute certainty, that one day it will pull me back. The river remembers things it shouldn't. The old man was right. It remembers me. Story 3. Silent Wife. The body they found in the abandoned mine outside Juneau wasn't supposed to be there. I work for the Alaska Historical Preservation Society, cataloging forgotten gold rush sites before they collapse or get swallowed by the wilderness. It's lonely work, perfect for someone like me who prefers the company of the dead over the living. The dead don't. They ask questions. They don't judge. They just wait to tell their stories. The mine was marked on maps from 1898, one of hundreds dug during the rush when men came north chasing dreams of fortune and found only frozen ground and broken promises. I explored dozens like it, empty tunnels, rotted timbers, rusted equipment half buried in permafrost. Nothing unusual, nothing that prepared me for what I found 30 feet underground in a chamber that shouldn't exist. She was kneeling, perfectly preserved. Her dress was from the 1890s, pale blue fabric that looked freshly pressed despite being buried for over a century. Her hair was blonde, pulled back in a style I recognized from old photographs, and her skin was flawless. Not decayed, not mummified, just pale, impossibly pale, like porcelain or fresh snow. But it was her mouth that stopped me cold. It was open, wide open, frozen in a scream that made no sound. Her jaw extended further than any human jaw should go, revealing a darkness inside that seemed to swallow my flashlight beam. I stepped closer, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air, and that is when I noticed the temperature. Even for an Alaskan mine in October, this was wrong. My thermometer read minus 30 degrees. Outside it was barely freezing. The cold radiated from her body like she was the source, like she was generating it somehow. I reached out, professional curiosity overriding common sense, and touched her shoulder. Ice cold. Literally. My fingers stuck to the fabric for a moment, frost forming instantly where my skin made contact. I jerked back, saw the white outline of my fingerprints on her dress, watched them fade slowly as if something beneath the cloth was absorbing the heat signature. It's when I saw the man. He was behind her, lying on the ground, his body partially buried in rubble from a cave-in. Unlike the woman, he looked dead. Really dead. Desiccated skin, hollow eye sockets, bones visible through torn clothing. He'd been a prospector, judging by the tools scattered around him and the gold pan still clutched in his skeletal hand. But the positioning was wrong. She was kneeling over him, her hands resting on his chest in a pose that looked almost tender, almost loving, except for that scream. That endless, silent scream. I found his journal and a leather satchel nearby, pages brittle but readable. His name was Samuel Peterson. He'd come to Alaska in 1897 with nothing but determination and a claim that barely produced enough gold to buy supplies. The entries started normal enough. Weather reports, equipment problems, complaints about the isolation. Then he mentioned writing to a matrimonial agency back in Seattle. Said he needed companionship. Said the silence was driving him mad. 3 months later, she arrived. He never mentioned her name. Just called her his wife, his bride, his beautiful silent companion. And she was silent. According to his entries, she never spoke a single word. Not when she arrived, not during their brief courtship, not on their wedding night. He wrote that her muteness didn't bother him. He had enough of voices, of people, of noise. Her silence was peaceful, comforting, but then the entries changed. He wrote about how cold she was, how she never seemed to warm up no matter how close she sat to the fire, how she didn't eat, didn't sleep, just watched him with eyes that reflected light like an animal. He wrote about waking in the night to find her standing over him, her mouth open just slightly, her breath visible even though his wasn't. He wrote about the way the temperature dropped whenever she entered a room, how frost formed on the windows, how the water in their cabin froze solid even with the stove burning full blast. The last entry was dated March 15, 1898. Samuel wrote that he discovered something about his wife, something that terrified him. He touched her while she slept, pressed his hand against her chest to feel for a heartbeat, and instead of flesh he felt something else, something hard and cold and packed tight. He wrote that he torn open her dress, seen what was underneath, and realized with horror that his wife wasn't human. She was hollow, a shell, a beautiful shell filled with something ancient and wrong. He wrote that he was going into the mine to hide, that she was coming for him, that he could hear her footsteps on the frozen ground even though she made no sound. The entry ended mid-sentence. I looked back at the kneeling woman, at the frozen scream, at the hands resting on the dead prospector's chest. The story was impossible, but I was looking at the proof. Somehow this thing, this creature wearing a woman's shape, had followed Samuel into the mine, had found him after the cave-in, had knelt beside his dying body and opened her mouth in that terrible silent scream. I needed to get out. Document this, report it, let people smarter than me figure out what she was. I turned to leave and when I heard it. Not a sound, the absence of sound. Complete silence. My footsteps made no noise. My breathing produced no whisper of air. Even my heartbeat, which I could feel pounding in my chest, created no pulse in my ears. The silence was absolute, oppressive, like something physical pressing against my eardrums. The temperature dropped further, my flashlight flickered. In the dying light, I saw movement. The woman, she turned her head, slowly, mechanically, her neck rotating with the smooth precision of ball bearings on ice. Her eyes found mine. They were blue, beautiful, empty, like looking into a winter sky with nothing behind it. I ran. The tunnel was dark, my flashlight useless now, but I knew the way out. I mapped it coming in. 30 feet to the entrance. 30 feet to daylight and safety and sanity. My boots slipped on ice that hadn't been there before. The walls were covered in frost, sparkling in what little light remained, patterns forming in the crystals that looked like hands reaching out, grasping, pulling. Behind me, I heard footsteps, light, delicate, the footsteps of a woman in a dress walking across a frozen floor. But there was no sound. I heard them in my mind, felt them through the ground, sensed them in the change of air pressure as something moved through the darkness behind me. Getting closer, I reached the entrance. Daylight hit me like a physical force. I stumbled out into October's sunshine that felt warm despite the freezing temperature, felt real despite the impossible horror I just escaped. I turned back to the mine entrance, expecting to see her emerge, that beautiful hollow thing with her silent scream and her skin like snow. But she wasn't there, just darkness, deep and cold and waiting. I sealed the mine entrance that afternoon, brought in equipment, collapsed the tunnel with controlled charges, buried it under tons of rock and permafrost. Told my supervisors it was unstable, dangerous, not worth preserving. They accepted my report without question. I filed the paperwork, marked the site as destroyed, and tried to forget what I'd seen. But Samuel's journal, I kept it. I read it dozens of times now, looking for answers, trying to understand what his wife was, where she came from, why she existed. The matrimonial agency he used was real. I tracked it down through historical records. It operated out of Seattle from 1890 to 1900, arranging marriages for frontier men and mail-order brides looking for new lives. I found 17 cases of men who used that agency. Prospectors, trappers, homesteaders scattered across Alaska. All of them died within a year of their brides arriving. All of them in isolated locations. All of them found with their wives kneeling nearby, mouths open, bodies impossibly preserved. The records called it a coincidence. Bad luck. The harsh Alaskan climate claiming victims. But I know better. I've seen the pattern. The agency wasn't sending brides. It was sending something else. Something that wore the shape of lonely women, that traveled north to the coldest, most isolated places on Earth, that found desperate men and gave them exactly what they wanted. Companionship, beauty, perfect, peaceful silence, until it was time to scream. I think about Samuel sometimes, about his last moments in that mine, trapped by rubble, watching his wife kneel beside him with that mouth open wide. I wonder if he understood in those final seconds, if he realized that her scream wasn't for him but for something else. A signal maybe, a call, a way of marking where she'd been, what she'd taken, how many souls she'd collected in her hollow body packed with ancient snow. The mine is sealed now, buried, forgotten. But sometimes, on the coldest nights, I wake up in my cabin and feel the temperature drop. I hear footsteps that make no sound. I see frost forming on my windows in patterns that look like women in old-fashioned dresses, their mouths open wide, their eyes empty and blue and beautiful. And I wonder if I sealed the mine to keep her in, or if she is already out. If there are more of them, if that agency sent dozens, hundreds, spreading across Alaska like a plague of silent brides collecting their husbands one by one. I wonder if she remembers me, if she is looking for me. The thought keeps me awake at night, listening to the silence, waiting for footsteps I will never hear, watching for a woman I hope never comes. But deep down, I know the truth. The cold is spreading, the silence is growing. And one day, Ella kneel beside me too, her beautiful hollow body filled with snow older than memory, her mouth open in that terrible voiceless scream that only the dead can understand. Story 4. Ice remembers I stopped believing in coincidence the night the fog showed me my own death. Let me back up. I moved to Fairbanks, Alaska 3 months ago for work. Environmental surveyor. Good pay, terrible weather, the kind of job that makes sense on paper but feels like punishment once you reliving it. They warned me about the cold. They warned me about the darkness. Nobody warned me about the ice fog. It rolls in when the temperature drops below -40. The moisture in the air freezes instantly, creating this thick, white wall that swallows everything. Visibility drops to less than 10 feet. Time seems to stop. The locals call it the fog that remembers, but I thought that was just folklore. Small-town superstition. I was wrong. The first time I saw something in the fog, I was driving home from a survey site near the Chena River. It was late January, -48 degrees. The fog came in fast, like a living thing rushing across the highway. I slowed to a crawl, my headlights barely cutting through the white. Then I saw the car, a cherry red Chevrolet Bel Air, pristine condition, chrome gleaming even through the fog. It drifted past me going the opposite direction, silent as a ghost. The weird part was the driver. He wore a fedora and a suit from another era. His face was expressionless, eyes fixed straight ahead. Behind him, a woman in the passenger seat stared out the window with empty eyes. Both of them looked gray, like old photographs come to life. I pulled over, heart hammering. By the time I looked back, the car had vanished. The road behind me was empty. No tire tracks in the snow. Nothing. I told myself I was exhausted, seeing things, but the image stuck with me. That gray skin, those hollow eyes. The next incident happened 2 weeks later. Same stretch of highway, same suffocating fog. This time I heard voices. A man and a woman arguing in the distance. The words were muffled, but the tone was clear. Anger, desperation, fear. I followed the sound, walking off the road into the fog. The voices grew louder, then suddenly cut off. When the fog thinned for just a moment, I saw them. A couple in 1960s clothing. standing beside an old pickup truck. They were frozen mid-argument, mouths open, faces twisted in rage. Then the fog swallowed them again. I ran back to my truck and didn't stop shaking for an hour. I started asking around town, carefully, the kind of questions that make you sound crazy. An old-timer at the Howling Dog Saloon finally told me the truth. His name was Ray, 70-something, lived in Fairbanks his whole life. He leaned in close when I mentioned the fog, his breath smelling like whiskey and tobacco. The ice fog replays the past, he said. Events that happened here, moments that left an impression. Car accidents, arguments, deaths. The cold preserves them somehow, locks them into the moisture and ice crystals. When conditions are right, they play back like recordings. He had seen his own father in the fog once, walking home from the gold mine where he died in 1967. Ray watched him vanish into the white, the same way he must have vanished the night he froze to death. I wanted to call him crazy, but I had seen that red Chevrolet, those gray faces. I knew he was telling the truth. Then things changed. In mid-February, the fog rolled in thicker than I had ever seen it. I was working late, documenting soil samples near an old abandoned airfield. The temperature plummeted. The white wall came rushing across the flat landscape like a tidal wave. I barely made it to my truck before visibility dropped to zero. That is when I smelled it. Frozen blood, metallic and sharp, cutting through the cold. It was so strong I could taste it. I covered my nose, gagging, trying to figure out where it was coming from. Then I saw the accident. A semi-truck jackknifed across the road. The cab was crushed against a telephone pole. Steam rose from the wreckage. But it was all wrong. The truck was too modern. The pole looked new, and the scene had a strange quality to it, like watching something through a filter. I approached slowly, boots crunching in the snow. Inside the cab, I saw the driver. His face was bloody, head slumped against the steering wheel. Then I noticed the date on his insurance card, visible through the shattered windshield. March 3rd, 2025. 2 weeks in the future. I stumbled backward. The smell of frozen blood intensified. The scene flickered, like a projected image losing power, then vanished completely. The fog cleared just enough for me to see the road ahead. Empty. No accident. No truck. Just the telephone pole, standing straight and intact. I drove home in silence, hands gripping the wheels so tight my knuckles ached. The fog was no longer just replaying the past. It was showing the future. And that smell, that horrible metallic stench, was the warning sign. Over the next few days, I became obsessed. I researched everything I could find about ice fog, about Fairbanks history, about temporal anomalies. Nothing explained what I was seeing, but I noticed a pattern. Every time the fog showed me a future event, it came true. A house fire on the edge of town, a bar fight that turned deadly, a medical emergency at the hospital. I would smell the frozen blood first, then see the event in the fog. Days later, sometimes hours later, it would happen exactly as I had witnessed. I tried to warn people, called in anonymous tips to the police about the semi-truck accident. Nobody took me seriously. How could they? I had no proof, just the word of an outsider who claimed to see the future in the fog. March 3rd arrived. I stayed off the roads, watched the news obsessively. At 7:42 p.m., the report came through. A semi-truck had jackknifed on the Richardson Highway, exactly where I had seen it. The driver was killed instantly when the cab struck a telephone pole. I sat in my apartment, staring at the screen, feeling sick. The fog knew. It always knew. After that, the visions came more frequently. The temperature stayed brutal through March, and the ice fog rolled in almost every night. I saw drownings, heart attacks, car crashes, murders, each one preceded by that smell, that awful frozen blood scent that seemed to cling to my clothes, my skin, my lungs. I stopped trying to warn people. What was the point? The future was fixed. The fog showed me what would be, not what might be. Then, last week, something changed again. I was driving home late. Another endless night survey completed. The fog came in fast. Temperature at -52. The smell hit me immediately. Stronger than ever before. So intense my eyes watered. I pulled over, knowing what was coming. The vision formed slowly this time, emerging from the white like something rising from deep water. I saw my own truck, wrapped around a tree on the side of the road, the front end completely destroyed. And through the shattered windshield, I saw myself, head twisted in an unnatural angle, eyes open but seeing nothing, blood frozen in dark streams down my face. The date on my dashboard clock was clear. March 28th, 2025, 11:47 p.m. Tonight, I've been sitting in my apartment for the past 6 hours, trying to decide what to do. Stay inside? That seems like the obvious choice. But I've seen enough visions now to understand something terrible. The fog doesn't show possibilities. It shows certainties. Every event I witnessed came true exactly as shown. No exceptions, no variations. The temperature outside has dropped to -54. I can see the fog forming in the distance, rolling toward town like a living thing. My shift supervisor called twice, wondering why I'm not responding to the emergency survey request. Apparently there has been a gas leak at one of the remote stations. They need someone to check it immediately. It can wait until morning. The same station is 3 miles past where I saw myself die. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe if I dawn to go, the future changes. Maybe the vision was a warning, not a prediction. But I know better. I watched too many people walk into their own deaths, playing out scenes I witnessed days earlier in the fog. The ice doesn't lie. It just shows what is already written. My phone is ringing again. It's my supervisor. If I dawn to answer, he send someone else. A colleague, someone with a family, someone who doesn't, they driving toward their own death on a road that remembers everything and forgets nothing. Outside, the fog has reached my building. I can smell it now, seeping through the window seals. Frozen blood, sharp and metallic, the scent of futures that have already happened, just waiting for us to catch up. I'm picking up my keys. I know how this ends. I saw it in the ice. But maybe that is the point. Maybe some of us are meant to drive into the fog, to become one more memory frozen in the Alaskan dark. One more ghost for travelers to glimpse when the temperature drops and the white wall rolls across the highway. The fog remembers everything. And soon, it will remember me too. I walk into my truck now. The engine turns over. The dashboard clock reads 11:04 p.m. 43 minutes until impact. Until my future becomes my past. Until I join all the other ghosts trapped in the ice, replaying our final moments for anyone unlucky enough to see. They say the fog that remembers is just superstition. They were wrong. It is memory made visible. Time frozen and preserved. And tonight, as I drive toward that tree on the empty highway, I understand the terrible truth. We are all already ghosts. Some of us just haven't finished dying yet. The fog knows. It's always known. And now, so do I. Story 5. Thing in the glacier. As veins, the ice was bleeding when we found it, and that should have been enough to make us stop drilling. My name is Marcus Webb. I am a glaciologist. Or at least I was before what happened at Mendenhall. Now I'm just someone who knows too much about what lives in the ice. What has been waiting there, frozen and patient, for longer than human memory. We arrived at the Mendenhall Glacier Research Station outside Juneau in early April. A team of 6. Our mission was simple. Extract deep core samples to study climate patterns from the last ice age. Standard work. I'd done it a dozen times before in Greenland, Antarctica, Norway. This was supposed to be routine. The first 2 weeks went perfectly. We drilled through layers of pristine ice, cataloging air bubbles and sediment. Then we hit the vein at 847 meters down. That's when everything changed. I was monitoring the drill screen when the camera picked it up. A dark channel running through the ice, maybe 6 inches in diameter. But it wasn't a crack or a mineral deposit. It had texture, organic texture. The surface rippled like muscle tissue under translucent skin. And it was pulsating, slow, rhythmic contractions moving along its length like something breathing. I called Dr. Sarah Chen over. She'd been studying glacial biology for 20 years. She stared at the monitor for a full minute without speaking. Then she told me to bring up a sample. Carefully, very carefully, we modified the drill bit, used a hollow core extractor. The ice around the vein was discolored, tinted with something that looked disturbingly like old blood. When we pulled up the sample, the smell hit us first. Copper and rot and something else. Something animal. The kind of smell that triggers every instinct in your brain screaming danger. The vein segment was 12 inches long, frozen solid in the ice core. Under the laboratory lights, we could see more detail. The thing was segmented like an earthworm, but the segments moved independently even while frozen. Tiny bristles covered its surface. And along one side, there were what looked like mouths. Dozens of them. Small circular openings ringed with inward-pointing teeth. Sarah wanted to thaw a small section. I argued against it. The way those segments moved, The way those mouth things looked ready to open, everything about it felt wrong. But scientific curiosity is a powerful drug. She overruled me. We placed a 2-inch sample in a controlled thaw chamber. Temperature set to slowly rise to just above freezing. We watched through reinforced glass, cameras recording everything. For the first 30 minutes, nothing happened. The ice melted. Water pooled around the segment. Then it twitched. Not the slow contraction we'd seen in the ice. This was fast. Violent. The segment whipped back and forth, testing its freedom. The bristles extended, each one moving independently like tiny fingers. And the mouths opened, all of them at once. The teeth were translucent, like ice crystals sharpened to points. Then it started moving toward the glass. Not randomly, with purpose. It knew we were there. Sarah increased the magnification. That is when we saw the worst part. Inside each mouth, there was a smaller tube, a proboscis that extended and retracted, probing the air, looking for something. We realized what when it pressed against the glass. The proboscis left a mark. Not water, not slime, blood, human blood. The thing was already infected with us. Somehow, we sealed the chamber immediately and dropped the temperature back below freezing. The segment kept moving for another 40 seconds before the cold finally stopped it. But we'd all seen enough. This wasn't some ancient worm or prehistoric parasite. This was something else, something that understood prey. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those pulsating veins in the ice. We only found one channel. But Mendenhall Glacier is massive, 13 miles long, over 100 square miles of ice. If there was one vein, there had to be more. Maybe hundreds, maybe thousands, all of them down there in the dark, moving slowly through frozen arteries, waiting. The next morning, Sarah made the decision to extract a larger sample. She wanted to study the neural structure, assuming it had one. I advised immediate contact with the CDC, with Fish and Wildlife, with anyone who might know how to handle a biohazard this strange. She refused. This was the discovery of a lifetime. She wasn't going to risk someone else taking credit. We went back to the borehole that afternoon. The drill had been running overnight, going deeper. When we checked the camera feed, my blood went cold. The veins were everywhere. Dozens of them. Hundreds. They crisscrossed through the ice like a circulatory system, all pulsating in sync. And they were moving toward the borehole, toward the heat of the drill. I told Sarah we need to pull out. Seal everything. She ignored me. She was mesmerized, watching those things converge on the screen. She ordered the drill to reverse, to bring up more samples. I watched the extraction tube rise through the ice, through that mass of writhing veins, and I knew we made a terrible mistake. The sample came up at 4:47 p.m. 5 feet of ice core packed with vein segments. Dozens of them frozen together in a tangled mass. We loaded it into the transport container and brought it to the lab. The smell was overwhelming now. That copper rot animal stench so thick I could taste it. We were preparing the thaw chamber when Jenkins, our equipment tech, cut himself on the container, this metal edge. Just a small slice across his palm. A few drops of blood hit the ice core. That was all it took. The segments erupted. The ice shattered from the inside as they thrashed and twisted, desperately reaching for the blood. Jenkins stumbled backward. One segment broke free, hitting the floor. Before any of us could react, it had closed the distance. 6 feet in under 2 seconds. It latched onto Jenkins' boot and started burrowing. The teeth sawed through rubber and leather like they were paper. Jenkins screamed and kicked, but the thing held on. The proboscis extended, punching through his sock and into his ankle. His scream changed pitch, got higher, more desperate. We grabbed him, tried to pull the thing off. The bristles had deployed like hooks, embedding in his flesh. When we finally tore it free, it took chunks of him with it. Sarah hit it with liquid nitrogen. The segment froze instantly, but the damage was done. Jenkins' ankle was shredded. But worse, we could see something moving under his skin, little lumps traveling up his calf. The proboscis hadn't just injected. It had deposited something. We got Jenkins to the medical station, tried to cut the infection out, but whatever those things were, they moved fast. By the time the doctor made the first incision, they reached his knee. Then his thigh, moving through his bloodstream like they owned it. Jenkins lost consciousness around 6 p.m. By 7 p.m., his veins had started to darken. By 8 p.m., they were pulsating. He died at 9:23 p.m. But his body didn't stop moving. The things inside him kept going, converting his circulatory system into something else. Something like those veins in the ice. When we finally worked up the courage to examine him, We found that every vein and artery in his body had transformed. They'd become part of the network, part of the system, and they were still moving, still pulsating, looking for a way out. We sealed Jenkins in the freezer and called for emergency evacuation. But there was a storm moving in, 100-mile-per-hour winds. No planes or helicopters could reach us for at least 3 days. We were trapped in the station with whatever those things were. That first night was the worst. We could hear sounds in the walls, scraping, scratching. The station was built on the glacier itself, anchored into the ice. And that ice was full of veins. They found us, found the warmth. We watched through the floor grates as they moved beneath us. Hundreds of segments writhing through frozen channels, all converging on the heat signature of 6 terrified humans. Sarah finally admitted we needed to destroy everything. The samples, the data, the borehole, all of it. She tried to contact the university to report what we found, but the storm had knocked out communications. We were completely isolated, just us and the things in the ice. The next day, we gathered every explosive charge we had. Dynamite, thermite, everything used for controlled ice demolition. We loaded it all into the borehole. The plan was simple. Blow the hole closed, collapse the channel, bury those things under 1 million tons of ice where they belong. But when we approached the drill site, we saw that the borehole had changed. The edges were melting. Heat was rising from below. And in that heat, segments were emerging. Dozens of them, crawling up the hole, following the warmth to the surface. Some were small, finger-sized. Others were thick as my arm. All of them covered in bristles and mouths and those horrible probing tubes. We dropped the charges and ran. The explosion shook the entire glacier. A column of ice and steam shot 200 feet into the air. The borehole collapsed. The drill site vanished under tons of shattered ice. We stood there in the freezing wind, watching the settling debris, hoping it was enough. It wasn't. That night, segments started appearing in the station. Small ones at first, coming up through the drains and ventilation. We killed them with fire and cold, anything we could use. But for everyone we destroyed, 2 more appeared. They were learning the layout, finding the weak points, and they were getting bolder. On the 3rd night, Sarah didn't make it to breakfast. We found her in her quarters. Her door was frozen shut from the inside. When we broke through, we saw what had happened. A large segment had come through the floor drain. It had gotten to her while she slept. Her arm was covered in entry wounds, dozens of proboscis punctures. And her veins were already changing, already pulsating with that slow, rhythmic movement. We locked her room and didn't go back. The evac helicopter finally arrived on day 4. We told them we had an accident, a contamination. We needed immediate quarantine protocols. They didn't ask questions. They just got us out. I watched Mendenhall Glacier disappear beneath us as we flew toward Juneau. From the air, I could see dark lines running through the ice. Veins, thousands of them, all moving slowly toward the edges of the glacier, toward the places where the ice meets the sea, toward the thaw. The official report listed the incident as a drilling accident. Methane pocket explosion, 2 casualties. The site was permanently closed. The borehole was listed as sealed and secured. But I know the truth. I know what's down there. What is spreading through the glacier like an infection. What surfaces during the spring thaws when the ice melts and those things can finally move freely. They dynamited the borehole shut. But Mendenhall Glacier is melting. 3 feet per year. Every summer, more ice disappears. More veins get exposed. More segments reach the surface. And nobody is watching anymore. Nobody is keeping track of what crawls out of the ice and into the rivers and lakes and eventually the ocean. Sometimes I drive up to Juneau and look at the glacier from a distance. On warm days, you can see dark patches on the surface. Melt pools, places where the ice has given way. But tourists think they were just shadows, just tricks of the light. But I know better. I know what is moving in those dark spaces. What is waiting for the ice to finally release its grip. The thing is, glaciers are everywhere. Greenland, Antarctica, the Himalayas, thousands of miles of ice that has been frozen for millions of years. And all of it is melting. All of it is giving up its secrets, its veins, its infections. I haven't worked in glaciology since Mendenhall. Because every time I see ice, I think about what might be inside it. What might be pulsating in the frozen dark. What might be waiting for someone to drill deep enough, thaw carefully enough, bleed accidentally enough. They say the things only surface during spring thaws. that the cold keeps them dormant. But spring comes every year. And every year, the thaw lasts a little longer. The ice retreats a little further. And those veins get a little closer to freedom. I don't sleep well anymore. I keep thinking about Jenkins, about Sarah, about what they became, what might still be down there in the frozen dark, wearing their faces, pulsating with their blood, waiting for the glacier to finally melt, waiting for the warmth to reach them, waiting to spread. The ice was bleeding when we found it. And now I understand why. It wasn't the glacier bleeding. It was us, all of us, every drop of blood that was ever soaked into snow, every body that has ever been buried in ice, every piece of organic material that is ever frozen into those ancient layers. The veins weren't feeding on the glacier. They were feeding on us, on our history, our DNA, our evolution, building themselves into something that understood us, something that could use us, something that could become us. And we drilled right into their heart and invited them out. The borehole might be sealed. The station might be closed. But the glacier is still melting. The veins are still pulsating. And somewhere in the ice, in the dark, in the cold, those things are still moving. Still growing. Still waiting. Spring comes early now. The thaw lasts longer. And every year, a few more segments reach the surface. A few more mouths open. A few more proboscises start probing the air, tasting the warmth, searching for blood. They say you can stop the ice from melting. Climate change is inevitable now. The glaciers will disappear, all of them, eventually. And when they do, everything frozen inside them will finally be free. That is what keeps me awake at night. Not what we found, but what else is still down there? Still frozen, still waiting, still pulsating in the dark veins of ice that cover our world. The glacier remembers everything it swallows, and soon, very soon, it's going to give it all back. Story 6. Echo people. The echoes in Nome started talking back 3 days after the storm, and by the end of the first week, 4 people had walked into the snow and never come back. I am a long-haul trucker, been driving the Alaskan routes for 15 years. I've seen some strange things up here. Northern lights that move wrong, animals that watch you with too much intelligence, roads that seem to shift when you're not looking. But nothing prepared me for what happened in Nome during February of 1995. Nothing prepared me for the Echo people. I rolled into town on February 11th, hauling supplies from Fairbanks. The storm had hit 2 days earlier, one of those brutal Arctic blasts that comes out of nowhere and tries to kill everything in its path. Wind speeds over 80 miles per hour. Whiteout conditions, temperature dropped to 50 below. The kind of storm that makes the locals, people that lived through dozens of winters, genuinely afraid. The town looked wrong when I arrived. Too quiet. Nome is a small place, maybe 3,500 people. But it is usually got life to it. Mining town energy, rough edges and tough people. But that day, the streets were empty. Shops closed. No one outside despite the clear skies. Just that heavy, waiting silence that comes before something bad. I made my delivery to the general store. The owner, a guy named Tom Hendricks, looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were red and darting, kept glancing at the corners of the room like something might be hiding there. When I asked what was wrong, he just shook his head and told me to make my delivery quick and get out of town. Said things had gotten strange since the storm. Said people were hearing things. I finished unloading and headed to the Polaris bar for a drink and some food before the long drive back. The bar was nearly empty. Just a handful of locals huddled together at one table, speaking in low voices. The bartender, a woman named Marie, poured my whiskey with shaking hands. When I heard it for the first time, I said something, just a casual comment about the weather. My voice bounced off the walls the way it normally does in an empty room. But then it kept going. The echo lasted too long. 5 seconds, 10, 15, long after it should have faded. And in those final seconds, the echo changed. The words twisted. What I said was cold enough for you. What came back was cold enough for you to die. Marie's face went white. The locals at the table stopped talking and stared at me. One of them, an older Inuit man, stood up and walked over. He told me I needed to leave Nome tonight, before dark. He said the echoes had started the day after the storm passed. At first, it was just minor things, sounds lasting a bit too long. Then the echoes began to repeat words differently, change meanings, turn innocent statements into threats or confessions or terrible truths. Within 2 days, the echoes started having full conversations. They would wait until someone spoke, then respond with things no one else could know. Private fears, hidden shames, secrets buried so deep the person themselves had tried to forget. The echoes knew everything, and they used that knowledge like a weapon. The old man, his name was Joseph. He told me his neighbor had been one of the first victims. A woman named Sarah Mills. She'd been home alone when the echoes started talking to her. Her husband came back from the store to find her standing in the middle of the living room, having a conversation with herself. Except it wasn't to herself. The echoes were responding, telling her about the affair she had 5 years ago. The one her husband never found out about, describing it in cruel detail, twisting the memory into something uglier. Sarah had screamed at the echoes to stop, but screaming just gave them more words to work with, more ammunition. They threw her own voice back at her, distorted and mocking, revealing every mistake, every lie, every moment of weakness. Her husband stood there listening as the echoes destroyed his wife, his mind, and his marriage in the span of 10 minutes. When they finally stopped, Sarah walked out the front door into the snow. She was wearing slippers and a nightgown. Temperature was 40 below. They found her body 3 days later, frozen solid 2 miles outside of town. 3 other people had vanished the same way, walked out into the killing cold after the echoes broke them. Joseph said the town was trying to stay quiet, speak as little as possible, but you can to live in complete silence. Eventually, everyone has to talk. And when they do, the echo people are waiting. I should have left right then, gotten in my truck and driven straight back to Fairbanks. But I was exhausted. The drive from Fairbanks is brutal in winter. 8 hours of icy roads and white-knuckle driving. I needed sleep. The motel was 2 blocks away. I figured I could keep quiet for one night. Just stay in my room. Dawn, they say a word, and leave at first light. I checked into the Bering Sea Inn just before sunset. The desk clerk didn't say a word, just handed me a key and pointed upstairs. Smart. The less you talk, the less ammunition you give them. I went to my room, locked the door, and sat on the bed in silence. The room was small and cold despite the heater running full blast. The walls were thin. I could hear the wind outside. And underneath that, something else. A kind of whisper. Thousands of tiny sounds layered on top of each other, like the building itself was breathing. I lasted until 8 p.m. before I cracked. The silence was driving me crazy. Just to break the tension, I said hello to the empty room. Just that one word, hello. The echo came back normal at first. Hello. Then it continued. Hello, David. This is my name? David Marsh. I hadn't told anyone my name in Nome except the desk clerk. And I only signed the register. But the echo knew. Hello, David. Are you afraid yet? My blood went ice cold. I didn't respond. Didn't make a sound. But the echoes kept going. They didn't need me to speak anymore. They pulled my voice from somewhere, from the air itself, and started telling me things. About my ex-wife. About the real reason our marriage ended. About the night I got drunk and made a decision I've spent 10 years trying to forget. About the son I don't talk about. The one who doesn't talk to me anymore. The words kept coming. My own voice, distorted and cruel, telling my story back to me with every ugly detail highlighted. Every failure magnified. Every regret laid bare. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The echoes weren't coming from outside. They were coming from inside my head. From my memories. The echo people weren't just in the room. They were in me. I don't know how long it lasted. Could have been minutes. Could have been hours. Time stopped meaning anything. All that existed was my voice telling me truths I buried. Showing me who I really was. What I'd really done. When it finally stopped, I was on the floor, curled up, shaking. Then I heard the footsteps in the hallway, slow and shuffling, someone walking past my door. Then they stopped. Right outside my room. I held my breath. The doorknob started to turn. I delocked it. I knew I delocked it. But it turned anyway. The door opened. A woman stood in the doorway, middle-aged, wearing a nightgown. Her feet were bare. Her face was blank, empty, but her mouth was moving, whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but I recognized what was happening. The echo people had her. They were using her, speaking through her. She took a step into my room. Then another. Her empty eyes locked onto mine. She spoke in my voice. Asked me why I was still alive when better people had died. Asked me why I thought I deserved to keep breathing when I failed everyone who ever loved me. Each question hit like a physical blow. The echo people knew exactly where to strike. Exactly what words would hurt most. I scrambled backward until I hit the wall. The woman kept coming. Her mouth moved, but the words were coming from everywhere. From the walls. From the floor. from inside my own skull. She reached for me with pale, frozen hands. That's when I noticed her fingertips. They were black, frostbitten. She'd been walking in the snow. She was one of the missing, one of the ones who had gone into the cold and should have died. But the Echo people were keeping her alive, using her body, making her walk, making her hunt. I grabbed the lamp off the nightstand and smashed it into her face. She didn't to react, didn't to bleed, didn't to feel it. Just kept coming, kept speaking in my voice, kept telling me my secrets. I shoved past her and ran into the hallway. Big mistake. The hallway was full of them. 5 figures, maybe 6, all standing perfectly still, all with that same blank expression, all with blackened fingertips and faces. The missing people had known. The ones who walked into the snow. The Echo people had collected them, turned them into something else, something between living and dead. And now they were all looking at me. They spoke in unison, every voice different but saying the same words, telling me to go outside, telling me the cold was waiting, telling me I'd feel better once I stopped fighting, once I accepted what I really was, once I let the snow take me. I ran down the hallway, down the stairs, through the lobby. The desk clerk was gone. The entire building was empty except for those things following me. I could hear their shuffling footsteps, could hear my own voice echoing from their mouths, repeating every fear, every failure, every reason I should just give up and walk into the cold. I burst out the front door into the night. The temperature hit me like a wall. 50 below, maybe worse with the wind chill. My breath froze in my lungs, but I didn't care. I just ran toward my truck, parked 2 blocks away. Behind me, the motel door opened. The figures emerged, moving faster now, almost running. The Echo people were hunting. I reached my truck and fumbled with the keys. My hands were already going numb. I could barely feel my fingers. The engine turned over once, twice, then caught. I threw it in gear and peeled out, tires spinning on the ice. In my rearview mirror, I saw them standing in the street. 6 figures, perfectly still, watching me go. And I could still hear them, even over the engine, even through the closed windows. My voice, speaking my secrets, promising this wasn't over. I drove through the night without stopping, 8 hours straight back to Fairbanks. By the time I arrived, the sun was coming up and I couldn't feel my face. Frostbite on my cheeks and nose. But I was alive. I was out of Nome. The official story was that 5 people disappeared during the storm. Exposure deaths. Tragic but not unusual for Alaska winters. The town recovered. Life went on. But I made calls, talked to people I knew up there, and the stories kept coming. The echoes never completely stopped. They got quieter after a few weeks, less aggressive, but they were still there, still waiting. And every winter, when the storms get bad enough, they come back stronger. A friend of mine went through Nome last year, said the town feels wrong now, like everyone is afraid to talk too loud, afraid to say certain things, afraid that if they reveal too much, the echoes will grab hold and drag those words back out. Twist them, use them, turn its own voices into weapons against them. The scientists tried to explain it. Something about the storm creating atmospheric conditions that affected sound waves, ionization, magnetic fields, technical jargon that doesn't to explain what I heard, what I saw. Those weren't the atmospheric conditions walking through that motel. Those weren't the sound waves telling me my secrets. The Inuit elders have a different explanation. They say the storm opened something, a crack between our world and somewhere else, somewhere that things listen, things that feed on shame and fear and guilt, things that learn to speak by stealing our voices, by replaying our words until they understood how to hurt us with them. The Echo people aren't people at all. They are something older, something that has always been in the dark and the cold, just waiting for a way in. After Nome, I changed my routes. I don't drive through there anymore. Can bring myself to do it. Because sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in my cab, I still hear it. My voice, coming from the darkness, asking me questions I don't want to answer, telling me secrets I thought I left behind in that frozen town. The worst part I sent to the fear. It's the doubt. Because the Echo people didn't just repeat my words. They showed me who I really am. Stripped away all the lies I tell myself. All the justifications. All the excuses. They held up a mirror made of my own voice and forced me to look at the reflection. And what I saw there was ugly. True. But ugly. That is their real power. Not the cold. Not the fear. It's the truth. The Echo people make you face everything you buried. Everything you that run from. Everything you that pretended doesn't to exist. And for some people, that truth is worse than dying. That truth is worth walking into the snow just to make it stop. I think about Sarah Mills sometimes, the first victim, walking out in her nightgown and slippers. Was she trying to escape the echoes? Or was she trying to escape herself? The person the echo people revealed her to be. I don't, But I understand the impulse. I felt it that night in Nome. That pull toward the cold. That promise of silence, of an end to the voices. They say the storm that brought the echo people was a once-in-a-generation event. The perfect combination of temperature and wind and atmospheric pressure. They say it won. It happened again for decades. Maybe never, but they've been watching the weather reports from Nome. And every winter, there are storms. Smaller ones, quieter ones, but still strong enough to make the echoes last a little too long. Still strong enough to make people nervous. Still strong enough to remind everyone what is waiting in the spaces between words. Because that is the thing about the echo people. They don't need a storm anymore. The crack is open. They already hear, already listening, already learning. Every secret we speak out loud. Every fear we whisper in the dark. Every truth we try to hide. The echoes are collecting them, storing them, waiting for the next time the conditions are right. The next time they can use our own voices to tear us apart. I haven't been back to Alaska in 3 years. I stick to the lower 48 now. Warmer routes, safer routes. But I still hear it sometimes. Late at night in truck stops, in empty rest areas, in the darkness between stations on the radio. My voice, asking me if I remember Nome. Asking me if I remember what I learned about myself. Asking me if I'm ready to stop running. The echo people are patient. They can wait. They have all the time in the world. And they know that eventually, everyone has to speak. Everyone has to reveal themselves. And when they do, the echoes will be there, ready to catch those words, ready to twist them, ready to show people exactly who they really are. That is the horror of it. Not monsters, not ghosts, just truth. Your own truth, spoken back to you in your own voice, stripped of all the comfortable lies you've wrapped around it. The echo people don't need to kill you. They just need to make you face yourself. The cold does the rest. Nome is still there. Still standing. Still occupied. Life goes on, but the people there know better than to speak too freely. Better than to reveal too much. They learn to live with the echoes. To coexist with the things in the spaces between sounds. To accept that some words, once spoken, can never be taken back. And on the darkest, coldest nights, when the wind howls just right and the temperature drops low enough, the echo people come back. Stronger, clearer, hungrier, ready to collect more voices, more secrets, more souls willing to walk into the snow rather than face what the echoes reveal. I think about going back sometimes, facing it, confronting whatever the echo people want to tell me, proving I'm stronger than my own truth. But then I remember that motel hallway, those empty eyes, those blackened fingers, and I remember that the echo people don't just show you the truth. They make you become it. They strip away everything else until all that is left is the ugly core you've been hiding. The thing you've been running from your whole life. And maybe that's what happened to those people who walked into the snow. Maybe they didn't. They died from the cold. Maybe they're still out there, beyond Nome, beyond the edge of town, living as their truths, as the stripped down, revealed versions of themselves that the echo people created. Maybe that is worse than death. Maybe that is what the echo people really want. Not to kill us, but to reduce us, to make us face what we are and force us to live with it in the frozen dark. The echoes in Nome are still there, still listening, still learning, still waiting for the next storm, the next crack, the next chance to speak. And when they do, they only use our voices, our words, our truths, and some of us want to survive what they reveal. Story 7. Hungry snow of Hatcher Pass. The snow was eating me alive, and I didn't to realize it until I saw my own blood frozen in perfect circles on the white surface. My name is Jake Mitchell. I am a backcountry skier. Been doing it for 12 years. I know the risks. Avalanches, hypothermia, getting lost. I've trained for all of it. What happened to me at Hatcher Pass in January wasn't something you can train for. It wasn't something anyone warned you about, because the snow up there doesn't just bury you. It feeds on you. I went up alone on January 14th. I know, never ski alone, but I've done this run 100 times. The weather was perfect. Blue skies, fresh powder from the storm 2 nights before. I packed all my safety gear, beacon, probe, shovel, emergency blanket, flares, everything by the book. I started my ascent at 9 a.m. from the Independence Mine parking lot. The climb took 2 hours. By the time I reached the ridge, the sun was high and the conditions were ideal. The first run was perfect. That feeling of carving through untouched powder, the silence of the mountains, the rush of speed and control. I made it down without incident and started my second climb. That's when I noticed something odd. The snow on the upper slopes looked different, darker somehow, like it had a gray tint mixed with the white. I figured it was just mineral content from the rocks, iron or something similar. But when I got closer, I realized the gray wasn't uniform. It moved, shifted, like the snow itself was breathing. I should have turned back. Every instinct told me something was wrong, but I did come too far, climbed too high, and the skeptic in me said I was just seeing things. Tired eyes, mountain altitude, nothing to worry about. So I kept going. I reached my drop point at 1:15 p.m. The gray-tinted snow was everywhere up here. It covered the entire face I planned to ski. But the consistency looked good. The slope angle was safe. No signs of instability. I checked my beacon one more time, adjusted my goggles, and pushed off. The first 30 seconds were normal. Then I felt it, a pulling sensation, like the snow was grabbing at my skis. Not catching on something, actively grabbing, holding. I compensated, shifted my weight, tried to maintain speed. But the resistance got stronger. I slowed to a crawl despite the steep pitch. That's when the slope gave way. The avalanche wasn't too big, maybe a 20-foot slab. In normal circumstances, I could have ridden it out or self-arrested. But this snow moved differently. It didn't flow like normal powder. It clung, wrapped around me, pulled me down with intent. I went under fast, tumbling in the cold darkness, feeling the weight pile on top of me. When the movement stopped, I was buried. Not deep, maybe 3 feet. I could tell because I could still see light filtering through above me. My training kicked in, create an air pocket, conserve oxygen, worked methodically to dig out. I pushed my arms up, trying to create space. That's when I felt the first bite, sharp pain in my forearm, like teeth sinking into flesh. I jerked reflexively, but the snow held me tight. Then another bite, on my thigh, then my shoulder. Small, precise punctures through my ski jacket and thermal layers. Through everything, I tried to scream, but the snow was pressed against my face, forcing its way into my mouth. And I swear I felt something in there. Something solid, something moving, something with edges. I thrashed harder, panic overriding training. The bites increased, dozens of them, hundreds, all over my body, each one a small burst of pain followed by intense cold. Localized frostbite setting in instantly. I could feel my skin dying, freezing, being consumed. The snow wasn't just burying me. It was eating me. My right hand broke the surface. I clawed at the snow above me, pulling myself up inch by inch. Each movement brought more bites, more pain, more cold spreading through my body. But I kept going, kept fighting. Finally, my head emerged. I sucked in air, gasping and choking, pulled myself fully onto the surface and rolled away from the disturbed snow. That is when I saw them. The marks, covering my jacket, my pants, my gloves, perfect semicircular indentations. Like bites, like something with a circular mouth had latched on and tried to feed. I tore off my glove. My hand was covered in red marks, each one surrounded by blackened, frostbitten skin. The frostbite was localized to just the bite area. Nowhere else. My jacket had protected me from the cold, but not from whatever had made those marks. I looked back at the avalanche debris, the gray-tinted snow, and I saw movement, subtle rippling across the surface, like something underneath was shifting, repositioning, waiting. I grabbed my skis and started hiking down as fast as I could. Away from that hungry snow, away from whatever lived in it. The hike down took 3 hours. Every step was agony. The frostbite was spreading from the bite marks. My skin felt like it was being eaten from the inside. By the time I reached my truck, I could barely move my fingers. The blackened areas had grown, spread beyond the initial punctures, like an infection, like something was still feeding on me even though I was miles from the mountain. I drove straight to the hospital in Anchorage. The air doctor looked at my injuries and went pale. He'd never seen frostbite like this. Perfectly circular, deep tissue damage despite my protective clothing. He asked if I'd been attacked by something. I told him about the avalanche, about the bites. He nodded slowly, like he'd heard stories before but never believed them. Then he told me about the others. Over the past 15 years, there had been 4 other cases. All backcountry skiers or snowboarders, all caught in small avalanches at Hatcher Pass, all reporting the same thing. The snow biting them, the semicircular marks, the localized frostbite that spread like infection. 2 of them lost fingers. 1 lost his entire left foot. The 4th one died. The frostbite spread to his heart before the doctors could stop it. The official cause was always listed as severe frostbite from avalanche burial. But the doctors knew better. The injuries were too specific, too targeted, too much like something had been feeding. They sent samples to labs, run tests. The snow from Hatcher Pass showed unusual mineral content, high levels of iron and something else. Something organic that the labs couldn't de-identify. Something that remained active even when frozen. Something that seemed to respond to warmth, to blood. I spent 4 days in the hospital. They treated the frostbite aggressively, cut away the dead tissue, pumped me full of antibiotics even though it wasn't antibacterial. The blackened areas stopped spreading but never fully healed. I still have the scars. Perfect semicircles covering my arms, legs, and torso. 47 of them. I counted. 47 times that something in the snow tried to feed on me. After I got out, I did research. Talked to locals, old-timers who lived in the area their whole lives. And I heard the stories. The Inuit tribes used to avoid that part of Hatcher Pass. They called it the Hungry Mountain. Said the snow up there was cursed. That something lived in it. Something ancient. Something that had been frozen for thousands of years but never died. Just waited, dormant, until heat activated it, until blood woke it up. The stories went back generations. Hunters who went into the high country and never returned. Trappers found frozen solid with strange marks covering their bodies. Miners from the old Independence mine reporting that the snow up near the peaks moved on its own. That it followed them, chased them, that it was hungry. Most people dismiss the stories as superstition. Mountain legends meant to keep people safe by scaring them away from dangerous terrain. But I felt those bites, seen those marks, watched my own skin turn black and die in perfect circles. I knew the legends were true. I tried to report it, contacted the Park Service, the Avalanche Center, anyone who might listen. They documented my case, added it to the file with the other incidents. But they couldn't to do anything. Couldn't to close the area based on stories and unexplained injuries. Couldn't to prove that the snow itself was dangerous beyond normal avalanche risk. So Hatcher Pass remained open, and people kept skiing it, kept climbing into those upper bowls where the gray-tinted snow waited. 3 weeks after my incident, another skier went missing. 26-year-old guy from Fairbanks, experienced backcountry rider. His beacon was found near the same ridge where I'd been caught. Rescue teams searched for 2 days. They found his body on the 3rd day, or what was left of it. He was frozen solid, covered in those same semicircular marks. Hundreds of them, like he'd been swarmed, overwhelmed, fed upon until there was nothing left but frozen meat. The official report said he'd been caught in an avalanche and died of hypothermia and traumatic injuries. But the rescue team members I talked to told a different story. They said his body was drained, that there was almost no blood left in him, that the snow around him was stained dark red in patterns, circular patterns, like something had been feeding and then burrowed back into the snow when the rescuers approached. I started tracking incidents, every accident at Hatcher Pass for the last 30 years. The pattern was clear. Every few years, usually in deep winter when the snowpack was thickest, someone would have an encounter with the hungry snow. Most survived, got away with bites and frostbite, but some didn't. Some got buried too deep, stayed under too long, and the snow had time to feed. The worst part is nobody knows what it is. Some kind of organism, some kind of parasite that lives in the ice and snow. It stays dormant most of the time, frozen solid, harmless, but when conditions are right, when the temperature rises just enough or when blood hits the snow, it activates, becomes mobile, becomes aggressive, becomes hungry. I looked at theories, ancient bacteria, prehistoric microorganisms, something that evolved to survive in extreme cold by feeding on any warmth it could find. Something that developed circular mouths to latch onto prey. Something that could freeze its victims from the inside out, preserving the meat while it fed slowly over days or weeks. But theories done to help, done to explain, done to stop it. The hungry snow is still up there, still waiting, still feeding when it gets the chance. And people keep going into those mountains, keep skiing those runs, keep exposing themselves to something they don't to understand and can to see until it's too late. I haven't been back to Hatcher Pass. Can bring myself to do it. Just thinking about that gray-tinted snow makes my scars ache, makes the frostbite damage throb with phantom pain. Sometimes at night I dream about being buried again. Feel those bites, feel the cold spreading through my body, feel something with a circular mouth latching onto my skin and pulling. Drinking, feeding. Last month, I talked to one of the other survivors, a woman who had been caught up there 8 years ago. She showed me her scars, identical to mine, perfect semicircles. She told me they never stop hurting, that the frostbite damage continues to spread slowly over the years, that she has lost sensation in 3 fingers and most of her left foot, that the doctors can, to explain it, can, to stop it, can, to do anything but watch as the feeding continues somehow. Even though she is miles away, even though she hasn't to touch that snow in 8 years. She thinks part of it is still in her, still feeding, that when it bit her, it left something behind, something microscopic, something that continues to consume her tissue cell by cell, year by year, until eventually there will be nothing left but blackened, frozen flesh. I started noticing the same thing. My scars are growing, slowly, the blackened areas expanding outward, the frostbite spreading despite treatment, despite being in warm climates, despite being far from any snow. Something is still eating me, something I brought down from that mountain, something that is patient enough to feed slowly, to take its time, to consume me over decades instead of minutes. The hungry snow of Hatcher Pass ISN, to just dangerous because it can bury you. It is dangerous because once it bites you, once it gets a taste, it never fully lets go. It marks you, infects you, claims you as food to be consumed slowly over whatever time it takes. And there is no way to stop it. No treatment, no cure, just the slow spread of blackened skin, the gradual loss of sensation, the inevitable conversion of living flesh into frozen meat, being eaten alive. Have been since January, will continue to be until there is nothing left of me but another cautionary tale. Another unexplained case of spreading frostbite that doctors can, treat and scientists can, explain. The snow at Hatcher Pass is hungry. It's always been hungry. And once it tastes you, once it marks you with those perfect semicircular bites, you become part of its food supply, part of its slow feast, part of the mountain. I can feel it now, the cold spreading through my chest, the blackness creeping across my ribs, the sensation of being eaten from the inside. And I know that eventually, maybe in a year, maybe in 10, I'll go back to Hatcher Pass. Not because I want to, but because something in me is calling me back. Something that was left behind in that gray-tinted snow. Something that wants to finish what it started. Something that is hungry, always hungry, and patient enough to wait until I'm ready to be fully consumed. The hungry snow doesn't just feed on your body. It feeds on your will, your resistance, your future. And once it tastes you, you're never really free. You were just meat that hasn't finished freezing yet. Food that's still walking around. A meal in progress. That's the real horror of Hatcher Pass. Not the avalanches, not the cold, but the snow itself, the thing living in it. The ancient hunger that waits in those gray-tinted slopes. Patient, persistent, inevitable, and always feeding. Story 8. Weeping wells of Matanuska Valley, the ice from my well was crying. And when we tested the tears, they contained DNA from people who had been dead for 300 years. My name is Tom Garrett. I am a homesteader in the Matanuska Valley, about 40 miles northeast of Anchorage. Bought my property in 2015. 5 acres of good land with a deep well, a small cabin, and the kind of isolation most people dream about. I came up here to get away from the noise, from the chaos, from everything that makes modern life feel suffocating. What I found instead was something that made me wish I'd never left civilization. It started during the deep freeze of January 2018. Temperature dropped to 45 below and stayed there for 2 weeks straight. The kind of cold that makes metal brittle and turns exhaled breath into ice crystals before it hits the ground. My well kept producing water, which was unusual. Most wells in the valley froze at least partially during extreme cold snaps. But mine kept flowing. That should have been my first warning. On January 19th, I went to draw water for morning coffee. The bucket came up full of ice. Not frozen water, actual ice, like someone had dumped ice cubes down my well. But these weren't normal ice cubes. They were weeping, literally crying. Clear liquid ran down their surfaces in streams, pooling at the bottom of the bucket. I touched one. The ice was cold, obviously, but the liquid running off it was warm. Body temperature warm. And when I tasted it, because I'm an idiot who doesn't think before he acts, it was salty. Like tears, I figured it was some kind of mineral contamination. Salt deposits in the aquifer melting at different rates than the surrounding water. I dumped the bucket and tried again. Same result. Ice that wept warm, salty tears. I called my nearest neighbor, a guy named Pat Simmons, who'd been homesteading in the valley for 20 years. He came over, took one look at the weeping ice, and his face went white. He told me to stop using the well immediately. Said 3 other properties in the valley were experiencing the same thing. Said it happened during deep freezes. Said the old-timers called them the weeping wells. Said people who drank the water or used the ice started having problems. He wouldn't elaborate, just said to use bottled water until the temperature rose and the wells went back to normal. But I was curious, stupidly, dangerously curious. I collected samples of the ice and the liquid, drove into Anchorage and paid a private lab to run tests. Basic analysis first, water quality, mineral content, bacterial presence. The results came back 3 days later. The ice was normal frozen water, pure, no contamination. But the liquid, the tears, were something else entirely. High salt content, yes, but also organic compounds, proteins, and DNA, human DNA. The lab tech who called me sounded confused. She said the sample contained genetic material from at least 12 different individuals. All human, all distinct. But here, it's where it got strange. The DNA was damaged, degraded, like it came from remains that had been frozen for extended periods. She asked me where I'd gotten the sample. I told her my well. She went quiet for a long moment, then suggested I contact the authorities. I didn't. Instead, I collected more samples. I wanted to understand what was happening before I brought in outsiders. Before the property got condemned or turned into a research site, I filled containers with the weeping ice, watched it cry warm tears into collection jars, sent samples to 3 different labs under fake names. All came back with similar results. Human DNA, multiple individuals, signs of prolonged freezing and thawing. And one lab noted something the others missed. The DNA samples showed no genetic relationship to modern populations. The markers were old, ancient, like the individuals had died centuries ago. That's when I started researching the valley, its history. The Matanuska Valley was settled relatively recently. The big push came in the 1930s during the Great Depression when the government relocated farming families from the Midwest. But before that, it was native territory. Athabascan tribes lived here for thousands of years. And before them, according to archaeological evidence, there were others. Older peoples, groups that vanished from the historical record with little trace. I found references in old journals and expedition logs. Russian explorers in the 1800s mentioned strange wells in this area. Wells that produced water that tasted wrong. Water that made people sick. Water that carried memories. That phrase appeared multiple times. Water that carried memories. The natives avoided certain areas of the valley. Said the ground was hungry. Said it took people and kept them. Said the wells were doors to the frozen place beneath. I should have stopped digging. Should have capped my well and moved. But obsession is a powerful drug. I wanted answers. Wanted to understand what was beneath my property. What was crying through my well. What memories the water carried. So I did something incredibly stupid. I melted a large sample of the weeping ice and drank it. The effect was immediate. Visions. Not quite hallucinations. More like memories that weren't. To mine. I saw a man standing in a blizzard. He was freezing, dying. His skin was blue-white. His eyes were desperate. He was reaching for something. Calling for help that wouldn't come. And I felt what he felt. The cold burning his lungs. The ice forming in his blood. The slow shutdown of his body. The exact moment his heart stopped. Then I was someone else. A woman. Different time period. Different clothes. But the same death. Freezing. Alone. Calling out. And another. 12 different deaths. 12 different people. All frozen. All alone. All trapped in that final moment of desperate cold. I came back to myself lying on the cabin floor. 4 hours had passed. My body temperature was dangerously low despite being inside with the heat running. My fingers were blue. My lips were numb. I'd nearly frozen to death in a heated room. The water hadn't. It just carried DNA. It carried the experience of death. The final moments of everyone whose genetic material was in it. And drinking it meant living through all of them. I called Pat Simmons. Told him what I'd done. He showed up within an hour with 2 other valley residents. Older folks who who lived through previous deep freezes. They brought me inside, warmed me up, and told me the truth about the weeping wells. The truth the valley old-timers kept quiet. The truth that would make the area uninhabitable if it got out. The Matanuska Valley sits on top of an ancient permafrost layer. Thousands of feet of frozen ground that has been locked solid for millennia. And in that permafrost, preserved perfectly, are bodies. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. People who died in this valley over tens of thousands of years. Hunters caught in sudden storms. Travelers who got lost. Native peoples who fell through ice or got trapped in blizzards. Every death the valley witnessed, every person it claimed, got frozen into the permafrost. Preserved, stored, waiting. During extreme cold snaps, when the temperature drops far enough for long enough, something happens. The permafrost cracks. Not physically, something deeper. Some barrier breaks down. And the essence of those frozen dead, their memories, their final moments, their DNA, it seeps upward, carried by groundwater, rising through the aquifer, emerging from wells as ice that weeps warm tears. Ice that carries death, ice that wants to share its frozen memories with the living. Pat told me 7 people had died from drinking the weeping well water over the past 80 years. All of them froze to death in heated rooms. All of them experienced the memories of the dead. All of them got trapped in that final moment of freezing, unable to escape, reliving hundreds or thousands of deaths until their own bodies gave up and joined the permafrost collection. The wells went back to normal after the cold snap broke. Temperature rose to 20 below and the ice stopped forming. Regular water flowed again. No more tears, no more DNA. The barrier had resealed. The frozen dead had returned to their slumber. But I couldn't forget what I experienced. Those 12 deaths. Those 12 moments of desperate cold and final darkness. They stayed with me, played in my mind, and I started noticing things. My body temperature ran cold, consistently 3 degrees below normal. My fingers and toes were always slightly numb, and I had memories that weren't mine. Fragments, glimpses, a stone tool being shaped, a caribou hunt, a child crying for its mother, moments from lives lived centuries or millennia ago. The water had left something behind. Some connection to the frozen dead beneath the valley. Some channel that remained open even after the wells stopped weeping. Other homesteaders who encountered the weeping wells reported similar experiences. Persistent cold, phantom memories, dreams of freezing. Some moved away, couldn't handle carrying pieces of the dead in their minds. Others stayed, learned to live with it, learned to accept that they were now part of something older. Something that had been collecting deaths in this valley since humans first walked here. The lab results kept bothering me. DNA from dozens of unidentified individuals, all showing signs of having frozen to death. But the ages were wrong. The degradation patterns indicated deaths centuries or even millennia apart. How could one water sample contain genetic material from people who died across such vast spans of time? Unless the permafrost wasn't just preserving bodies. Unless it was collecting them, gathering them, adding to some kind of repository. I started mapping the wells and the valley that had produced weeping ice. There were 17 documented cases over the past century. They formed a pattern, a rough circle about 5 miles in diameter. And at the center of that circle was my property. My well, ground zero for whatever was happening beneath the valley. I did some research on permafrost geology, found references to something called a permafrost lens, a massive, deep formation of frozen ground that acts like a natural freezer, preserving anything that enters it for indefinite periods. The Matanuska Valley sits on top of one of the largest permafrost lenses in Alaska. It goes down at least 1,500 feet, and unlike most permafrost, which formed during the last ice age, this lens is older. Much older. Dating techniques suggested it's been frozen continuously for over 30,000 years. 30,000 years of collecting whatever died in this valley. 30,000 years of preserving bodies and memories and final moments. All of it locked in ice. All of it waiting. During extreme cold, the lens cracks. Just slightly, just enough. And what has been stored for millennia starts to leak out. Through groundwater, through wells, through any pathway to the surface. It wants out, wants to be remembered, wants to share its frozen deaths with the living. And anyone who drinks the water, anyone who accepts those memories, becomes part of the collection. Becomes another death stored in the lens. Another memory preserved in ice. I am writing this in December 2019. Temperature has been dropping steadily. We reforecasting another deep freeze. Colder than 2018. Longer. The kind of cold that might crack the permafrost lens deeper than it was cracked before. The kind of cold that might release more than just memories and DNA. The old-timers are scared. They remember stories their grandparents told, stories about deep freezes when the valley lost people, when homesteaders walked out into the cold and never came back, when wells produced ice that didn't just weep, when the frozen dead didn't stay buried. My well started producing weeping ice again 3 days ago, but this time it was different. The ice isn't just crying. It is moving, shifting, like something inside it is trying to get out. And the tears aren't warm anymore. They are cold, freezing, like the dead beneath the permafrost have changed their minds about sharing. Like they don't want to give us memories. They want to take ours. They want to pull us down into the frozen lands, add us to the collection, make us part of the 30,000-year archive of death. I can feel them now, the frozen dead. They not just memories anymore. They re-present, aware, watching through my well, through every well in the valley that started weeping, waiting for the temperature to drop just a few more degrees, waiting for the barrier to crack wide enough, waiting to come through. And when they do, they want to be memories or DNA or phantom cold. It'll be something else, something that has been frozen for so long it has forgotten how to be alive, something that wants to remember by taking the living down into the ice. The valley is emptying. Homesteaders are leaving, packing up and heading south before the deep freeze hits. The few who are staying have capped their wells, sealed them with concrete and steel. But I don't think it'll matter. The permafrost lens doesn't need wells. It has cracks now, pathways, ways to reach up through the frozen ground and touch the surface, ways to bring the living down to join the collection. I am staying, not because I am brave, but because I am already part of it, already carrying those 12 deaths, already connected to the frozen lens beneath my property, already halfway to being one of them. One more memory preserved in ice, one more death added to the 30,000-year collection. And when the deep freeze comes, when the temperature drops far enough, when the barrier finally breaks completely, I'll walk out into the cold. I'll find my place in the permafrost. I'll add my final moment to the collection. And someday, centuries from now, someone will drill a well. I'll draw water during a deep freeze, and the ice will weep warm tears containing my DNA. My memories, my death, and the cycle will continue. The valley collecting, the permafrost preserving, the frozen dead reaching up through wells to share their cold eternity with anyone foolish enough to drink. Story 9. Shadow that freezes water the ice around my brother. His body was perfectly clear, and when I looked closely, I realized his shadow was gone. My name is Michael Reeves. I am a hunting guide in the interior Alaska wilderness, working out of a small operation near Delta Junction. I've spent 15 years in these woods, seeing grizzlies, wolves, weather that can kill you in minutes. I thought I knew every danger these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong, dead wrong, and my brother Danny paid the price for my ignorance. It happened in October 2019. Danny and I were guiding 2 clients on a caribou hunt about 60 miles northwest of the Tanana River. Remote country, the kind of place where cell phones are useless and help is days away. We'd been out for 5 days when the temperature dropped. Not unusual for October, but this was different. The cold came fast and sharp, like someone had opened a freezer door. Within an hour, it went from 35 degrees to 10 below. No gradual change, just sudden, brutal cold. The clients wanted to turn back. Danny and I agreed. We started packing camp when one of them, a guy named Stevens from Texas, pointed at something moving through the trees. He thought it was a caribou. We grabbed our rifles and moved to intercept. That is when I saw it was an animal. It was a shadow moving independently across the snow. No body casting it, no object creating it, just a human-shaped darkness sliding over the white ground like oil spreading on water. Danny saw it too. He grabbed my arm and pulled me back. His face had gone pale. He whispered that we needed to leave immediately. Not pack up, not collect gear, just run. I'd never seen him scared like that. Danny was fearless, had face down charging bears without flinching. But this shadow, this impossible thing moving through the forest, it terrified him. We started backing toward camp. The shadow changed direction, started moving toward us, and where it passed, I heard a sound like glass breaking, sharp cracks echoing through the trees. I looked closer. The moisture in the air was freezing, instantly, creating tiny ice crystals that fell like snow. But only where the shadow moved, only in its path. Everywhere else, the air was clear. Stevens raised his rifle. I knocked the barrel down and told him not to shoot. Some instinct, some deep survival sense, told me that engaging with this thing was exactly the wrong move. We needed to avoid it, get away, put distance between us and whatever that shadow was. The four of us ran back to camp, started grabbing essentials, food, water, emergency gear. The shadow emerged from the tree line about 50 yards away. It was taller than a man, maybe 7 feet. The shape was humanoid but stretched, elongated, like someone had taken a normal human silhouette and pulled it vertically. And it was dark, not black, darker than black, like it was absorbing light instead of blocking it. Looking at it hurt my eyes, made my brain try to reject what it was seeing, because shadows done to exist without light sources, done to move independently, done to create frost patterns in the air around them. Danny told everyone to move slowly. No sudden movements, no noise. We started walking backward, keeping the shadow in sight. It followed, matching our pace exactly, maintaining the same distance, like it was herding us, guiding us somewhere. The temperature around us kept dropping. My breath froze instantly. Ice formed on my beard, my eyelashes. My fingers went numb inside my gloves. Then Stevens panicked. He broke and ran, sprinted away from the shadow toward a thick stand of spruce trees. The shadow moved, fast, faster than anything that size should move. It cut across the snow like a shark fin through water, intercepted Stevens before he made it 10 feet. And where it touched him, where its darkness overlapped his body, the air around Stevens exploded into ice. He didn't have time to scream. The moisture in his breath, on his skin, in his eyes, all of it flash froze. His body locked up mid-stride. He fell forward and hit the ground already encased in a shell of clear ice. Not snow, not frost, pure, crystalline ice like he'd been dipped in liquid nitrogen. Through the transparent surface, I could see his face. Eyes wide, mouth open, expression locked in absolute terror. The three of us remaining stood frozen ourselves. Not from ice, from fear. The shadow moved away from Stevens' body, started sliding toward us again, slowly, deliberately, and I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The ice around Stevens was perfectly clear. You could see every detail of his body, his clothes, his expression. But you couldn't see his shadow, the dark outline that should have been visible through the ice beneath him. It was gone, like it had been extracted, removed, taken by that thing moving toward us. Danny grabbed my shoulder and pointed toward a rocky outcrop about 200 yards away. He said the old stories mentioned that the shadow couldn't cross running water or climb rock faces. I didn't know what old stories he meant, but I wasn't going to argue. We ran. The other client, a younger guy named Martin, followed. Behind us, I could hear that glass breaking sound, the crackle of moisture freezing in the air. Getting closer, we reached the rocks and started climbing. The outcrop was steep but manageable, loose scree and granite slabs. We pulled ourselves up, hands scraping on stone, lungs burning from the cold air. I looked back. The shadow had stopped at the base of the rocks. It didn't attempt to climb, just stood there, watching, waiting. The darkness of it seemed to pulse, like it was breathing, like it was alive. We spent 3 hours on that outcrop, waiting, hoping it would leave. The shadow never moved, never wavered, just maintained its position at the base, occasionally shifting slightly like it was testing the boundary. Danny used the time to tell me what he knew. The stories his ex-girlfriend, an Athabascan woman from Tanana, had told him. The old legends, the warnings. The shadow was ancient, older than the tribes, older than human memory. It existed in the spaces between warm and cold, between light and dark. The elders called it different names, but the translation Danny remembered was the Cold Walker. It appeared during temperature crashes, those sudden drops that defied normal weather patterns. And it hunted, not for food, for something else. It took shadows, stole them from living things. And when it took your shadow, it took your warmth, your life, left you frozen in clear ice with your face locked in the moment of realization. The moment you understood what was happening. The victims were found occasionally, perfectly preserved in ice, always with that expression of terror, always missing their shadows. The ice around them was unusually clear. Scientists who examined the bodies couldn't explain it. The ice was pure, no air bubbles, no imperfections, like it had formed instantaneously from perfectly still water. But the missing shadows were never mentioned in official reports, either overlooked or deliberately omitted. Because how do you explain that? How do you report that someone's shadow has been stolen? Danny said his grandfather had encountered the cold walker in 1967. Saw it take 3 men from his hunting party. He survived by climbing a cliff face and staying there for 2 days until the shadow left. He warned the village, told them about the sudden cold that preceded it, the frost patterns, the sound of ice forming in the air. But most people dismissed it as superstition. Old stories meant to keep people safe by scaring them away from dangerous conditions. Around hour 4, Martin started showing signs of hypothermia. We were exposed on the rocks. No shelter, no way to build a fire without descending. The shadow was still waiting below. Patient, eternal. We had 2 choices: stay and freeze slowly, or try to escape and risk encountering it. Danny made the decision. We wait until full dark. Hope that the shadow had difficulty operating without light. Make a run for it under cover of darkness. It was the worst decision of his life. His last decision. We waited until the sun dropped below the mountains. The temperature fell even further. 20 below, 30. The cold was like a living thing, clawing at exposed skin, seeping through layers of clothing. When it was fully dark, we started our descent. Slowly, quietly. We couldn't see the shadow anymore. The darkness had swallowed everything. We used headlamps on the dimmest setting, just enough light to see where we were stepping. We made it halfway down before Danny slipped. His boot caught on loose rock and he tumbled, fell maybe 15 feet down the scree slope, landed hard but got up quickly. He was fine, shaken but uninjured. Then his headlamp flickered across something, a patch of deeper darkness. Moving. The shadow had been waiting. Knew we'd come down eventually. Had positioned itself perfectly. Danny ran, tried to scramble back up the rocks. But scree is treacherous. Loose stones gave way beneath his boots. He slid backward. The shadow closed the distance in seconds. I watched from above, helpless, as it overtook him. The air around my brother exploded into ice crystals, a cloud of freezing moisture that caught the moonlight like diamond dust. When it cleared, Danny was on the ground, encased in that same clear ice, face locked in terror, eyes staring up at me. And beneath him, where his shadow should have been, there was nothing. Just smooth ice reflecting the moon. Martin and I didn't breathe. The shadow slid away from Danny, his frozen body, started moving up the rocks toward us. Slowly, like it was savoring the hunt, like it knew we had nowhere to go. I grabbed Martin and we climbed. Hands bleeding, muscles screaming. We reached the top of the outcrop and kept going. Found a narrow crevice in the rock face. Wedged ourselves inside. The space was barely wide enough for our bodies. But shadows can squeeze through gaps, can decompress like flesh and bone. We stayed in that crevice for 18 hours, jammed in so tight we could barely breathe. The cold was unbearable. We took turns staying awake, making sure the other didn't fall asleep and slip into hypothermia. Through the opening, we could see the shadow. It stayed near the crevice entrance, waiting, patient. At one point, it seemed to reach toward us, the darkness extending like a hand. And where it touched the rock face, frost formed, instant crystallization spreading across the stone. When dawn came, the shadow faded. Not quickly, gradually, like it was being pulled back into whatever dimension it came from. By full light, it was gone. Martin and I extracted ourselves from the crevice. Every muscle hurt. Frostbite had claimed 3 of my fingers and 2 of Martin's toes. But we were alive. We climbed down, found Danny's body exactly where we left it. Perfectly preserved in ice, face frozen in that final moment of terror. Shadow missing. We couldn't move him. The ice was too thick, too heavy. We marked the location with GPS coordinates and hiked out. It took us 3 days to reach civilization. By the time we got rescue teams to the site, Danny's body was gone. The ice had melted. Nothing remained except a patch of disturbed ground and some equipment we left behind. Stephen's body was also gone. No trace, like they never existed. The official report listed them as missing, presumed dead due to extreme weather exposure. Martin backed my story about the sudden temperature drop, the dangerous conditions, but we didn't mention the shadow. Didn't talk about what we actually seen. Who would believe us? 2 men frozen in clear ice with their shadows stolen by a darkness that walks? It sounds insane. I know it sounds insane. But I saw it, lived it, lost my brother to it. I don't guide hunts anymore. Can't bring myself to go back into that country. Especially in October when the temperature drops fast. When the air gets that particular quality. That stillness that precedes something unnatural. I watch the weather reports obsessively, track sudden cold fronts, and when I hear about hunters found frozen in unexplained circumstances, I know. I check if anyone mentions the ice being unusually clear, if the victims' faces showed terror, if there are any odd details that don't make sense. And sometimes, buried in the reports, there, as I mention, a strange observation. The victim's shadow wasn't visible in the ice. Overlooked, dismissed as a trick of light or documentation error. But I know better. I know what took them. Know what is still out there, walking through the coldest places, stealing shadows, freezing people in clear ice, leaving them as warnings, as evidence, as proof that some legends aren't just stories. They survival instructions we've forgotten how to read. Story 10. Time slip. The newspaper in my hand was dated March 14th, 1915, and it described a murder that wouldn't happen for another 12 hours. My name is David Chen. I am a graduate student at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, or at least I was in March of 1977. I'm not sure what I am now, not after what happened that night. Not after I walked through 62 years in the span of 30 seconds and came back holding proof that time isn't as solid as we think it is. It was March 13th, late evening. I'd been studying at the Rasmussen Library until they kicked me out at closing. A blizzard had rolled in around 9 p.m. Heavy snow, high winds, visibility near zero, the kind of storm that makes you question why anyone lives this far north. But I walked this road 100 times, 6 blocks from campus to my apartment on Cowell Street. I knew every turn, every landmark. I could have done it blind. I made it 3 blocks before the world changed. One moment I was trudging through snow, leaning into the wind, barely able to see 5 feet ahead. The next moment the wind stopped, the snow stopped, and the silence was absolute. That is what I noticed first, the complete absence of sound. No wind howling, no distant traffic, no heating systems humming, nothing, just perfect, eerie silence. I looked up. The streetlights were different, not the sodium vapor lamps I'd passed under moments before. These were gas lamps, actual flickering gas lamps casting yellow pools of light onto dirt streets. Not paved roads, dirt, and the buildings around me had changed. They were older, wooden structures with false fronts, the kind you see in old photographs, the kind that shouldn't exist anymore. Then I heard the horse, the clop of hooves on frozen ground. I turned and saw a carriage moving down the street. A real horse-drawn carriage, steam rising from the animal's nostrils. A driver bundled in furs holding the reins. And as it passed under a gas lamp, I could see the passengers inside. A man and woman dressed in clothing from another era. Long coats, high collars. The woman wore a hat with feathers. I stood frozen, watching the carriage roll past. The driver glanced at me. His eyes went wide. He pulled the reins hard, stopping the horse. He stared at me like I was a ghost. Like I was something that shouldn't exist. And I realized I was wearing a modern winter jacket. Blue nylon, synthetic materials, things that wouldn't be invented for decades. To him, I was the impossible thing. The driver opened his mouth to shout something. Then the world lurched. The silence shattered. Wind and snow crashed back into existence like a wave. The gas lamps became sodium vapor. The dirt street became asphalt. The carriage vanished, and I was standing alone on Cowell Street in 1977. Exactly where I'd been before. Except I was holding something I hadn't been holding before. A newspaper, rolled up tight, slightly damp from snow. I unfolded it under the nearest streetlight. The Fairbanks Daily News Miner, March 14th, 1915. The paper was old but perfectly preserved, like it had been printed yesterday. The headline read, "Local businessman found dead in home. Foul play suspected." The article described the murder of Theodore Wickham, owner of Wickham General Goods on 2nd Avenue. He'd been found stabbed in his home on the evening of March 14th. Police suspected robbery. The killer had not been caught. I read it 3 times, standing in the blizzard, trying to make sense of what I was holding. A newspaper from 62 years ago, describing a murder that, according to the date on the paper, happened tomorrow. Except tomorrow in 1915 had already happened. Was history. Was done, unless it wasn't. Unless somehow I walked into March 13th, 1915, spent 30 seconds there. And when I came back, I brought something with me. Proof, evidence, a newspaper that couldn't exist but did, that I was holding with my own hands. I ran the rest of the way to my apartment, locked the door, spread the newspaper on my kitchen table and examined every inch. It wasn't a reproduction. Wasn't a prop. The paper was genuine, aged. The ink was real. The printing methods were authentic to the era. And the article about Theodore Wickham, this murder, was detailed. Specific. It listed the address where he was found. 547 9th Avenue. It described the weapon, a hunting knife. It mentioned that his safe had been opened and money taken. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at that table, staring at the newspaper, trying to understand. Had I hallucinated the whole thing? Some kind of blizzard-induced psychosis? But the newspaper was real, physical. I could touch it, smell the old paper, see the genuine aging. This wasn't a delusion. This was proof that something impossible had happened. At dawn, I made a decision. I needed to verify the murder. Needed to know if Theodore Wickham was real. If the murder described in the paper had actually happened. I waited until the university library opened, then searched historical records. It took me 3 hours to find it. A brief mention in a 1915 archive. Theodore Wickham, owner of Wickham General Goods, found murdered in his home at 547 9th Avenue on the evening of March 14, 1915. Death by stabbing. Robbery suspected. Killer never caught. The newspaper had been accurate. Every detail matched, which meant I hadn't just hallucinated. I'd actually been there, actually walked through time, actually witnessed 1915 Fairbanks for 30 seconds. And somehow, I brought back proof. But here is what terrified me. The newspaper was dated March 14th. The murder happened on the evening of March 14th. But I picked up this paper on March 13th in 1915, which meant the paper was reporting a murder that hadn't happened yet. That would happen the next day. The newspaper I held was predicting the future, or reporting an event that was fixed in time, inevitable, unchangeable. I went to 547 9th Avenue. The building was still there. An old house converted into apartments. I asked around. Nobody named Wickham lived there now. The building had changed hands dozens of times over 6 decades. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something about that murder mattered. That bringing back this newspaper meant something. That I was supposed to do something with this information. Then I realized the newspaper I held was from 1915, reporting a murder that happened in 1915. But I was in 1977. What if the time slip wasn't too random? What if it was showing me something? Warning me about something? What if the murder described in that 62-year-old newspaper was about to happen again? I checked current records. No one named Theodore Wickham lived in Fairbanks. But the business name stuck with me. Wickham General Goods. I searched for similar businesses. Found one. Wickham Supply Company on 2nd Avenue. Almost the same location as the original store. Owned by a man named Theodore Wickham III. Grandson of the murdered man. He kept the family business alive. Moved it slightly. Modernized it. But maintained the name and legacy. I didn't know what to do with this information. Call the police? Tell them I walked through time and brought back a newspaper predicting that the grandson of a 1915 murder victim was in danger? They have me committed. But I couldn't ignore it. Couldn't pretend the newspaper didn't exist. Couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been shown something for a reason. I went to the store. Wickham Supply Company. It was a hardware and outdoor equipment shop. The man behind the counter was in his 60s. I asked if he was Theodore Wickham. He confirmed. I asked if he knew about his grandfather. He nodded slowly, said the family didn't talk about it much. The murder had been a dark stain on the Wickham name. Never solved, never avenged, just a sad piece of history. I wanted to warn him. Tell him to be careful tonight. But how do you warn someone about a murder that happened 62 years ago and might happen again without sounding insane? I bought a flashlight I didn't need and left. Spent the rest of the day trying to decide what to do. At 8 p.m., I went back to the store. It was closed, lights off, but I could see movement inside. Someone was in there. I approached the front window. Through the glass, I could see Theodore Wickham III. He was at the register, counting money. And behind him, emerging from the back room, was someone else. A figure in dark clothing, moving quietly, holding something, a knife. I didn't think. I grabbed a rock from the parking lot and smashed the front window. The alarm erupted. Theodore spun around, saw the figure behind him, and dove to the side. The attacker lunged, missed, and ran for the back door. I climbed through the broken window. Theodore was on the floor, shaken but unharmed. The police arrived within minutes. They caught the attacker 3 blocks away, a drifter who had been casing the store for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Carrying a hunting knife, The police interviewed me, asked why I'd been at the store, why I'd broken the window. I told them I'd seen someone suspicious through the glass. Saw the attack about to happen. They accepted it, called me a hero. Theodore thanked me, said I saved his life. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had. That the time slip had shown me the pattern. That the Wickham family was cursed to repeat this murder every 62 years unless someone intervened. And somehow, impossibly, I'd been given the chance to stop it. But the story doesn't end there, because 3 days later, I was walking that same route. Same time, same conditions. Another blizzard had rolled in. And the silence came again. The wind stopped. The snow stopped. And I was standing on that dirt street in 1915. Gas lamps flickering. Horse-drawn carriages rolling past. And this time, I saw someone. A man standing under a gas lamp. Staring at me. He was wearing modern clothing. A winter jacket. Jeans. Boots. Just like me. And he was holding a newspaper. Just like I had been. We locked eyes. He looked as terrified as I felt. Then the world lurched. 1977 came crashing back. But the man was gone. And I was left with the horrible realization that I wasn't the first. That someone else had experienced the time slip. Had walked through decades. Had brought back a newspaper. Had maybe saved someone. And maybe that is what the slip is. A loop. A warning that repeats. Showing people the pattern. Giving them the chance to break it. To prevent the inevitable. To change what seems fixed. I still have the newspaper. March 14th, 1915. The paper has started to age now. Yellow and brittle. But the words are still clear. The murder still described. Proof that I walked through time. Proof that some events echo across decades. Proof that maybe, just maybe, we re-given chances to change the future by witnessing the past. I've walked that route hundreds of times since. Always during blizzards. Always at night. Always hoping and dreading that the silence will come again. That I'll slip through to another year. Another time, another warning. But it hasn't happened. Maybe it only occurs when it is needed. When its life hangs in the balance. When the pattern is about to repeat. When intervention is possible. Or maybe I'm just marked now. Part of the loop. Someone who walked between years and carries proof. Someone who knows that time T solid. That the past and present can overlap. That sometimes, in the right conditions, in the right place, in the right moment of atmospheric chaos, the barriers break down. And you can step through, witness, bring back evidence, and maybe, if you, repaying attention, change something that seemed unchangeable. The newspaper sits in my desk, sealed in protective plastic, proof that Theodore Wickham died on March 14th, 1915. Except he didn't. I saved his grandson, broke the pattern, changed the future by understanding the past. And somewhere in the loop, in the slip, in the space between years, maybe that matters. Maybe that is enough. Maybe that is the point. I graduate next year, leave Fairbanks, move on, but I'll always wonder about that road, that street, that moment when the world went silent and I walked through 62 years in 30 seconds. Wonder if someone else will experience it, will bring back proof, will save someone, will break another pattern. Wonder if the time slip is random or intentional. Chaos or design, curse or gift, warning or opportunity. All I know is this, time ISN T as solid as we think. The past ISN T dead, the future ISN T fixed. And sometimes, in the middle of a blizzard on a dark street in Alaska, the barriers break. The years overlap, and you get a glimpse of what was and what will be. And if you brave enough, smart enough, lucky enough, you can reach across decades and change something. Save someone, break the loop, and maybe that is the real horror. Not that time slips, but that it shows us patterns we meant to break, gives us warnings we meant to heed, and then leaves us wondering if we'll be ready when the silence comes again.
Thank you for visiting to Midnight Whisper Stories. I am the creator of this channel, where every dark story is designed to help you escape the noise of the day and immerse yourself in a world that spark your imagination. I write every script, design every image, hear voice actors to bring my stories to life, and edit everything myself. So sit back, relax, and let the whispers of the night guide you.